Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I've got a short one for you from Living Waters Ministries, and it's about morality. These are always so much fun, although this one is regrettably banana-free. Let's go!
I do right because of my conscience, okay? So I do not have to fear something to do right. I do right because it's right, okay?
That's right. How do you know it's right?
The veil of ignorance is actually a pretty good thought experiment which can show you what is right or wrong. It was originally proposed as an idea for evaluating political decisions, but I find it works well for personal morality as well. Here's how it goes. Imagine a moral situation, say stealing. Is stealing right or wrong? Well, let's apply the veil of ignorance. Until the veil is lifted, you have no way of knowing whether you are going to be the thief or the victim. There's a 50-50 chance. Would you choose to allow the theft to happen, knowing that once the veil is lifted, it may be that you are the one being stolen from? It's a nice little way of applying pure self-interest as a way of determining what is right and wrong.
How can we know whether something is right or wrong? Where do morals come from?
Self-interest plus empathy equals morality.
Some might answer that we as individuals should determine our own morality. But think about it. If there's no objective standard for good, then wouldn't everyone consider themselves to be good, including the child molester and the rapist?
Have you ever read How to Win Friends and Influence People? The opening premise of the book is that everyone, even the indisputably bad guys of history, think that they are good guys. My kids know this. When the 4-year-old asked the 8-year-old if she's a good guy or a bad guy, she informed him that everyone will say they're a good guy because everyone thinks they are a good guy. But here we can apply the veil of ignorance once again. A rapist may enjoy raping people, but do you think he would say rape is okay if he didn't know whether, when the veil is lifted, he would be the rapist or the rape victim? Now, this is where I will admit that this isn't a perfect system. There will likely be some people out there who don't view rape as all that bad and wouldn't mind taking their chances, but those people are few and far between. Taken on the whole, this is a very useful device for determining morality without the need of a god to hand it down to you.
If morality can mean anything for anyone, then it means nothing for everyone.
Which is why the veil of ignorance is so useful. You generally could rely on a majority of people coming up with the same basic morality with this device, and a system of moral values derived from it would look pretty close to what we have today.
Others would claim that society determines morality.
Kind of. I mean, society does determine what is generally regarded as morally acceptable and morally taboo, but there are examples of societies where, if we were to place them in the veil of ignorance, almost nobody would agree that those societies would be moral, including the people who live in them.
Within this view, a society such as Nazi Germany could only be quietly observed, not judged nor opposed.
Well, let's apply the veil of ignorance, shall we? When the veil is lifted, you are either Hitler at the height of his power, or a German Jew at the height of Hitler's power. Would you take a chance at getting all the benefits of being Hitler at the risk of being one of the Jews he had thrown in a concentration camp? Using this device, we can clearly see that Nazi Germany is not a morally preferable society and can judge it as such, and we can also oppose it should anything like it start rearing its ugly head today.
In fact, if Nazi morals were right within Nazi society, there would have been a moral obligation for all Germans to murder innocent people.
Again, veil of ignorance. You're either doing the killing or being killed. Would you say that is okay, not knowing which one you'll be?
And obviously that's not right. When morality is defined by the present society standard, then challenging the standard would be an act of immorality.
Not necessarily. Plenty of things involved in a society are completely amoral. That is, they are neither right nor wrong, they just are. There are plenty of socially acceptable things for which their opposite is also socially acceptable. For instance, I could choose to take my kids to a theme park if I wanted to. That's fine, no problems. I could also choose not to, and that is also fine. Both of these options are socially acceptable. But that's not quite the point you were making, was it? So let's look at an issue like slavery. That was socially acceptable in the 1700s. Does that make it moral? I don't think anyone really thinks so. In fact, there were people opposed to slavery in the 1700s. People didn't think of them as immoral people. At worst, they were considered crazy for thinking that slaves ought to have rights. I mean, look at William Wilberforce, for instance. He lived in a society that accepted slavery as normal. At best, they looked at it as an amoral issue, and at worst, they considered it absolutely moral. Wilberforce opposed it vehemently and was hated by many people, but one thing I have never seen him described as is immoral. So yeah, even if society does dictate what is considered moral and immoral, it can be found to be wrong. But you know what? It's always people who find out that it's wrong. No God has ever stepped down and said, "Hey, please stop behaving this way, it's immoral." You'd think that if a God existed and wanted us to behave in a specific way, that God would tell us in a way that is indisputable, and as in not the Bible, which can be used to either condemn or justify such moral atrocities as rape, slavery, murder, and genocide, just to name a few.
Within this worldview, social reformers such as Martin Luther King Jr. or William Wilberforce should be considered moral outcasts because they opposed the status quo.
Society determines morality is a very different statement than the status quo determines morality. And also, as a side note, I find it amusing that you chose to use Wilberforce as an example too. But you see, in my example, it is possible for people to have an impact on their society and change it for the better. How do we determine what is better, you ask? The veil of ignorance, I answer.
We count these people as moral heroes because they had the courage to fight for reform.
Yes, and in a society where most people remained ignorant of the amount of suffering being inflicted on their fellow human beings, they helped bring this suffering to light, and our collective empathy then shifted to allow these reforms to take place. Isn't it wonderful how us blundering humans can find ways to make things better for everyone if given enough time? And we seem to do this all by ourselves without a God ever coming down and saying anything like, "Hey, maybe don't be jerks to people just because they have more melanin than you, okay?"
They stood against their society because their society was wrong according to God's word.
Yeah, their society was wrong according to the Bible. Now go find me the Bible verse that explicitly condemns slavery. Go ahead, I'll wait. Oh, what's that? You couldn't find any? Well, while you were looking, I found some verses about slavery myself, so let's take a look. Exodus 21:2-6 says, "If you buy a Hebrew slave, he may serve you for no more than 6 years. Set him free in the 7th year, and he will owe you nothing for his freedom. If he was single when he became your slave, then he shall leave single. But if he was married before he became a slave, then his wife must be freed with him. If his master gave him a wife while he was a slave and they had sons or daughters, then only the man will be free in the 7th year, but his wife and children will still belong to his master. But the slave may declare, 'I love my master, my wife, and my children. I don't want to go free.' If he does this, his master must present him before God. Then his master must take him to the door or doorpost and publicly pierce his ear with an awl. After that, the slave will serve his master for life." Well, that's one where people like to argue that slavery was a nice little way of taking care of the poor people in ancient Israel. See how nice it is? You only have to be a slave for 6 years, but should you get married while being a slave, your master can hold your family hostage in order to keep you permanently. So yeah, not quite as bad as American slavery, but definitely not a walk in the park. Let's see what else the Bible has to say on the issue. Leviticus 25:44-46 says, "Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly." That seems to be at least as bad as American slavery was, and it also seems to be racially based. Oh, both those were Old Testament. I'm sure Jesus turned the tides on the slavery thing when he came preaching his gospel of love. So let's go to the New Testament for some verses on slavery. Let's see. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. "All who are under the yoke of slavery should consider their masters worthy of full respect, so that God's name and our teaching may not be slandered. Those who have believing masters should not show them disrespect just because they are fellow believers. Instead, they should serve them even better because their masters are dear to them as fellow believers and are devoted to the welfare of their slaves." Well, that seems to say that it's okay for Christians to keep slaves and that their slaves should be happy about it, or at least complacent. And these are only 3 verses, all of them explicitly permitting slavery, both Old and New Testament. So what was that about their society being wrong according to God's word?
C.S. Lewis wisely said, "A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line." Without God, morals are meaningless.
Why? I've often heard that asserted, but I've never really seen it explained. It's always this, without some omnipotent guy saying what is right and what is wrong, then right and wrong don't matter at all. Like I've shown how we can determine right and wrong based entirely on self-interest using the veil of ignorance and our empathy that comes from us being a social species. How exactly is that meaningless?
When man makes the rules, either individually or by majority rule, there will always be mistakes because mankind isn't perfect.
Yeah, I'll grant you that, but us not being perfect does not automatically mean that the universe owes us some perfect moral law.
God alone is perfect, holy, and good. He exists outside of the realm of mankind as the source of objective moral standards.
What is the mechanism for that, I wonder? How do his supposedly perfect morals make their way into people? Certainly it's not from that morally abhorrent book that people attribute to him, as that book condones things that are very clearly against both your morals and mine. I've heard it said that God's morals are written on every person's heart, but then how do you explain different moralities in different societies and at different times? And even if God is the source of morality somehow, how does that make it objective? The way I see it, that simply makes it subjective with God as the subject. When God does something, is that something automatically good because God did it? Or is it God's opinion that it is good? I think we can see with the veil of ignorance that God's actions are not automatically good. Look at the flood. You've got a 1 in 25 million chance that when the veil is lifted, you are God. 25 million being the approximate number of people alive in 2000 BCE when the flood supposedly happened and God killed all those people, mass genocide. So using the veil of ignorance, we can clearly see that at least some of God's actions are immoral, such as the flood. So is a thing moral because it's God's opinion? Well, then morality is just God's opinion, and since God is the most powerful being in the universe, we lowly humans have to obey. In other words, might makes right. So if morality is truly objective, then it's beyond God. If God's morality is the morality we need to follow, then there's no reason I can see beyond it being God saying, because I said so, and he's just the most powerful, so you gotta do what he says.
So the next time someone claims to be good without God, remember, that's just no good.
And the next time someone claims that objective morality is impossible without God, just ask them if God is subject to those objective moral laws. Not as catchy, I'll grant you, but it's a good question to which I have never seen an adequate answer.
Do you believe in moral absolutes? Is there right and absolutely wrong?
Depends on the
So
situation.
how can you say I do that which is right?
Veil of ignorance.
Well, that's it for today. Remember to follow me on Twitter and support me on Patreon. Oh, also, it made me feel a little bit dirty, but I created a Facebook page too. It's called Vice Rhino. You can follow me there if you want to. Not sure if I'm going to keep it up or not. We'll see. See you next time.